Hey Eric, um, did you need me to support in any other way while the meeting is going?
Hey, Eric, can I just do a quick sound check? Or Christina?
I can hear you.
Great, thank you.
Mm.
Hi, Rosalie, Christina, Kate, and looks like we have Roy here with us. Just want to say hello.
Hi, hi, Eric.
Or can
Do
you hear me
you,
okay?
yeah, I can hear you great.
Cool.
Would it be helpful if I put the screen up that says the meeting will be starting soon, or should we wait
That would be
until?
great. Yeah, I
Okay,
think that makes sense.
give me just a moment to do that. Actually, it looks like the host disabled participant screen sharing, so someone will need to enable that.
All right, I made you the co-host, so hoping that allows you to do that.
All right, there we go. All right, how does that look?
Looks good.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Olson. I just thought I'd let you know that we're going to wait a few minutes for folks to trickle in. So I'll keep on checking back a bit, but we'll probably get started about 5 minutes in here. So at 5:05, if we don't have a large enough group before then, let's just get it going about then. So see you in about 5 minutes. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes now. It looks like we've got a few more people here. The attendance has grown a bit, so let's go ahead and get started. Um, I guess I'll just start out with a quick introduction for myself before I hand it over to my colleague Kate Rogers. But my name is Eric Olson. I am the Long Range Planning Manager at the City of Lake Oswego, and I am the project manager essentially for the city on our work to comply with the state requirements related to the housing production strategy. Um, and yeah, I'll hand it over to Kate to get started.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Rogers. I'm a planner with a firm called MIG, which is we're the consultants that have been hired by the City of Lake Oswego to help them put together a housing production strategy. So that is what we will be talking about tonight. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of our agenda for this evening. And do a little bit of housekeeping for tonight, and then I'll hand it back to Eric. So tonight we're going to do a little bit of a project overview, a little bit of a background on where this project is coming from and some of the city's critical housing needs that this project is working to address. And then we're going to give kind of a brief overview of the housing strategies that the city is currently considering as part of the housing production strategy. We're going to do some interactive polling through Zoom to see kind of where folks are in terms of supporting these various strategies that the city is considering, and then we'll have some discussion about the strategies, and then we'll talk about next steps. So just a few things to kind of get you oriented. We will be discussing these strategies at a fairly high level. These are, pretty technical, and there's a lot of detail that we've been working on and kind of describing in the documents we've been putting together. But for this evening, we're going to keep things pretty general and high level. So just keep that in mind. There's lots of information that is available from the project webpage if you're interested in digging into the details a little bit more. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing some interactive polling through Zoom because we want to get a sense of whether folks are supporting these strategies or have any concerns about them. So just keep in mind there's also an online survey that's also available right now. So if you're not able or feel comfortable responding to the polls at this time, the online survey actually is asking similar questions about the strategies. So if you want to give these a little more thought and maybe take the survey later, that is available to you. Also, we're going to be pausing at specific times for discussion. We're going to kind of review sort of a batch of strategies and then pause for discussion and then review another batch of strategies and then have a longer discussion at the end of the forum this evening. So I will ask that you'll try to hold off on comments or questions until we kind of pause at those times. I will also ask that you, as much as possible, put your questions in the chat. There's a little chat function in Zoom that you can see in your control panel. And that way we can kind of keep tabs on your questions and see which ones need to be addressed immediately for clarification, or which ones can kind of hold off until the bigger discussion. And we also ask that you try not to respond to other folks' questions in the chat, just because that might make the conversation a little bit difficult for us to keep track of. And yeah, just the last thing is there's a lot of information to get through this evening. So we might find that we need to kind of move things along if we're falling a little bit behind. So with that, I will pass it back to Eric to talk about the project overview.
All right, thanks, Kate. Yeah, I'll get going on the project overview here. Next slide. All right, so just as a bit of background about the project, really what we're talking about is planning for housing in a very general sense. There's this longstanding statewide planning goal here in Oregon that requires cities to plan for the housing needs of all of our community members within the city. And more specifically, there is a more recent bill that we're specifically responding to, House Bill 2003, that was passed in 2019. Essentially, that bill was intended to meet the housing needs of residents throughout the state by requiring that cities over 10,000 in population and all cities within the Portland metro area basically do two things: complete a housing needs analysis every 6 to 8 years on sort of a cycle to analyze what housing is needed for current and future residents in our city. And the second piece is to prepare a housing production strategy within 1 year of the HNA. So that's kind of the time period where we're in right now, to implement specific actions that would promote the housing production to meet those needs. So that just kind of is a really broad summary of where we're sort of coming from with this work. Next slide. So last year, we adopted our housing needs analysis. It was an update to that document that was adopted by City Council in in October of last year, 2023. And that HNA really looks at, sort of an acronym here. I might be referring to the housing needs analysis as the HNA. I'll try to keep that as simple as I can. But essentially what that document did was look at the community's 20-year housing needs and look to whether there's enough land in the city in order to meet those needs. What we're working on now, though, we're considering a range of different strategies that would essentially meet the needs that we identified through the housing needs analysis. And we're doing those within the housing production strategy. So that's really what we're here to talk about today. We're considering different things, such as changes to how the city zones land and regulates housing development, different financial incentives that we could provide to the private sector or nonprofits to promote housing production, funding sources that the city could be looking to produce or to create for the first time that could fund housing production or other sort of related film needs that the city has related to housing. We're also looking at partnerships with housing providers that the city could either further or sort of new partnerships that we could be creating, in addition to other tools and policies that we've been sort of talking about as we've gone through this process. Next slide. So just kind of to summarize what we found within that housing needs analysis document, I'll talk a little bit about the housing needs in terms of our current needs here within the city. So essentially the project team used the findings from the housing needs analysis, as well as additional information from the census, other data sources, and from some stakeholder interviews that were conducted to put some of Lake Oswego's housing needs into context with our current demographic and development trends. So basically the next few slides, I'll be going over some of the key findings that came out of that sort of analysis. So again, in terms of current needs, though Lake Oswego is generally considered an affluent community, as we're all aware, not all households within the city are actually wealthy. Over 40% of households in the city earn less than $100,000 per year, and nearly 20% of households earn less than $50,000 per year. Another sort of current need that we found through the HNA is that homeownership costs increased significantly in Lake Oswego, and that's consistent with national trends as well, but it is still fairly stark. The median home sale price in the city more than doubled over the last 10 years, from $395,000 to $860,000 in 2022. So that's just something to consider there. Yeah, so I guess just kind of moving on, other current needs that we were able to pinpoint were that there's very little existing housing available to those in the lower income segments of our population. So about 2/3 of existing housing units, both rental and ownership units, are unaffordable to those earning less than $100,000 per year. So that's again a large chunk of the city. And over 90% of existing housing units aren't affordable to those earning less than $50,000 per year. So really a lot of housing units that folks that already are living in the city are unable to actually afford. And generally speaking, nearly half of renter households in Lake Oswego are considered housing cost burdened, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income for housing. Next slide. In terms of some of the future needs that we were able to identify in the HNA, one of the major findings was related to the number of housing units that we'll need in the city. So Lake Oswego, we do expect we'll need about 2,000 new housing units within the 20-year sort of horizon that we analyzed last year. So by 2043, in order to meet the demand that we project the city will have at that time. So we'll have to sort of make sure that the city is producing housing across the income spectrum, in order for us to be able to meet those needs. And yeah, sort of following that, a wide range of housing types will be needed to meet the range of household sizes and incomes that we'll expect to have here in the city. So the majority of the new needed homes, about 61%, are projected to be attached housing units, So, that includes a variety of different housing, particularly middle housing units, including townhomes and plexes with 2 to 4 units, as well as multifamily housing with more than 4 units. About 34% multifamily, 27% middle housing is what we anticipate we'll need in the city. Next slide. More about future needs. So we anticipate that by 2043, more than a third of new housing units will be needed by low-income households. So those earning at or below 80% of what we call the median family income, or MFI, for Clackamas County. Just to clarify, that's set at a county level. The median family income in Clackamas County is $88,500, and that relates to a family of 4. So when we say 80% of MFI, we're talking about $71,000 income or less. So another finding that we were able to make is that the private market is not going to deliver the housing that low-income families need on its own sort of devices. Housing that's affordable to that income range, that 80% or lower of median family income in the county, typically requires government subsidy or partnerships with affordable housing providers. So it's not something that we can really depend on the market to provide on its own. And for the most part, here in the city, there's a shortage of land, buildable residential land across all different zoning types, low, medium, and high density housing, in order to meet the 20-year needs that we anticipate. So that corresponds to about 86 acres of deficit that the city has. So yeah, that's a unique sort of component here in the city. Not every city ends up with a deficit like that. So yeah, in general, the key housing gaps that we identified through the housing needs analysis, there's a lack of affordable housing for low and moderate income households, as it's probably obvious by the statistics that I went through in the last few slides. There's a need for greater housing choices within neighborhoods, including what we refer to as middle housing. Again, that kind of refers to townhomes, attached sort of duplexes or triplexes or quadplexes, and cottage clusters. So just kind of choices that fall within sort of apartments, between apartments and single family housing, something sort of in between in terms of cost. There also are needs within the city for opportunities for aging in place. One of the things that we found in our analysis is that more than 20% of the population is over 65, and there needs to be much more housing that's suitable for folks in those situations that are trying to age in place and stay here in Lake Oswego. There should be, also based on the analysis, we found that there's a need for more attainable home ownership and just different options for that, including condos and, again, middle housing. We also found that there's a pretty stark need for family-sized units for multifamily housing or apartments. So talking, 2 to 3 bedroom apartment units. About a third of the current households in the city have children. There's a lot of great amenities here in Lake Oswego that folks with children could benefit from. And so, I think there's a lot of folks that are hoping to find something a little bit larger, but still an apartment or, multifamily type of unit, but with more bedrooms than the typical, studio or 1-bedroom unit might indicate. Also, there's a need for multifamily housing outside of the town center. We've been doing a relatively good job producing housing within our sort of town centers in the last 10 years or so, but not so much outside of those areas. All right, next slide. So yeah, the housing production strategy, that basically we're working on right now is going to help meet those housing needs and help fill up those gaps. It's essentially intended to serve as basically a work plan for what the city is going to be doing over the next 8 years. So we're not talking specifically about every single component of what these strategies are going to look like on the ground. That's sort of conversations that will need to play out over the course of the next 6 to 8 years. But we are at least sort of establishing the general projects that will be undertaken by the city and making some commitments related to those projects. So really, the state of Oregon will be holding our city accountable for implementing or at least making progress towards implementation for all of the strategies that the city will adopt in our HPS. So something definitely to keep in mind as we keep sort of this conversation moving forward. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause right now. We had a few questions pop up in the chat, so it might be a good opportunity for us to address those right now. So I got a question just directly for myself that I can try to respond to from Mary Bosch. She asked, is the earnings figure median household income? When we were talking about, there was sort of a section where we were talking about, median household income. And, there was another section where we were talking about actual household incomes in the city of Lake Oswego. So we tried to make that distinction. I think you might have asked that when we were talking about just the sort of household incomes within the city. So I'm happy to follow back up with you on that if that's not clear enough, Mary, but I hope that makes sense. So we have another question. So the basically it's more of a comment that key housing gaps should include accessible housing and universal design. And that's something that kind of we meant to include sort of in that sort of opportunities for aging in place. I think that if you really take that to its logical extent, you are looking at units that have those features in them. So that's something that we certainly intend to look at with our housing production strategies. And I appreciate the input, Cynthia. And it looks like so yeah, we will be taking some questions, Cynthia, but we just want to make sure to get through all of the ones in the chat first. So it looks like there was a question about the difference between area median income and median family income. I sort of think those are used interchangeably a lot of the time, but Kate, I'm not sure if you have any more to add to that.
Yeah, I would say generally we've actually probably used both of those acronyms in various products as part of this project, but yeah, they essentially mean the same thing.
Yeah, apologies for any confusion there. All right, so it looked like Cynthia, you had your hand raised. We can go ahead and take a question from you before we move into sort of polling question with the rest of the group that we're hoping to get into here. So yeah, go ahead, Cynthia, if you want to let us know.
Thank you, Eric.
Any questions?
As you know, I was both on the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee and used to be on the 50+. And I think that accessible housing and universal life needs to be spelled out separately from aging in place. Because in Lake Oswego, it's extremely hard. And as you know, I'm disabled, but I know many other people with different types of disabilities. And I think that needs to be just, spelled out independently of others. It's so far has got lost in the shuffle. And I don't think it's moved ahead in the city. And I think there's a huge need for it, because people can also be temporarily disabled. And so I just wanted to say that I think we need to kind of move faster and farther on that one. And now we have an ADA coordinator, as you know, and some other things have went ahead. So I think it's a good time I think it's necessary. I'm just saying, as a LO resident, I find it necessary to put that in there and not have it continually lumped in quote unquote other categories. Thanks.
Thank you for your input, Cynthia. Appreciate it. Are there any other questions before we move on, or comments before we move on to the polling question? It looks like Roy, you had a question. It looks like you're muted, Roy. All right, I'm trying to ask you to unmute, but I don't know if that's giving you a prompt or anything. But yeah, it looks like you are currently muted. But feel free to, let us know in the chat if you're having trouble coming on unmuting. All right, well, I guess let's just move forward to the polling question here. And Roy, again, if you want to give us that question or comment in the chat, we'd be appreciative. All right, so I'll just kind of go over the question here. Oh, look, Roy, it looks like you're able to unmute there.
I think Roy's unmuted, but we still can't hear.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, Roy. I don't know what's going on. I will proceed to talk through this question. So this is just a general question that we've created here broadly about how you feel about the implementation of pro-housing policies ones that aim to increase housing choice or create more affordable housing in the community. So I will go ahead and launch the poll. The questions will, well, anyway, looks like we have all the questions at once, so I apologize for that there, but essentially the poll should be launched for the first question. You have 5 different potential responses here. One is that you strongly support or fully endorse the implementation of pro-housing policies and believe they're essential for our community. And these will be sort of similar prompts that we'll receive in future questions as well. So I'll just kind of go through them now, and that will sort of hold for the rest of this polling. Support would just be that you're in favor of this idea, but you might have some reservations. Neutral is that you really have no strong opinion either way. Opposed, you would have concerns and generally don't support the idea. And strongly opposed would be that you're just against the implementation and those policies and believe that they're not beneficial. All right, so I will take a look at the poll here. We'll leave this open. I think generally speaking, we want to leave this open for I think we just have question 1 so far is what we want to focus on. So I appreciate folks just focusing on that. I'll try to fix this in time for the next question here. But we will leave this up until 5:30. So yeah, we will have the poll come back for you after you've, I guess, selected for option 1. Yeah, I appreciate your patience with this polling. All right, so looks like we have about 9 responses so far for question 1. See if I can make sure we're covering everyone here. So we have 17 or so folks that aren't staff that are involved in the meeting here. So just I'll give a few more moments for folks to provide us with their answers. And yes, please go ahead and submit now for the first question, Betty. Roy, are you unmuted yet? All right, sorry about that.
I think that might be what we're going to get in terms of responses.
Yeah, I think we can probably just go ahead and move forward. I'm not sure we'll get more than 12 here. So appreciate everybody that wanted to participate here. Thanks for your response.
And Eric, are you able to share the results of the polls as we go along? I'm not sure how it's working with the setup.
I have to look into that. Typically I can, but I think it looks like all the questions are kind of included in one. So I will probably be able to do that in the future, but not for this first question. That's
okay.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
But essentially I can try to summarize them for folks. So I apologize that we're unable to share these on the screen. We did get 12 total responses. Generally speaking, 42% strongly support, 33% support, 8% neutral, and 17% opposed. So that should hopefully, give us a little bit of a sense of where folks are at with that question. And go ahead and end the poll so you can see at least the first question, and then I'll sort of revise things before our next question here. But yeah, let's go ahead and move forward, Kate.
Okay, great. All right, so yeah, now we're going to get into the details of the potential housing strategies that that the city is considering, and these strategies that we'll talk about tonight have been selected through you know, pretty significant evaluation of a wide range of strategies for this process, kind of funneling down into a set of strategies that we think you know, really have potential to be effective in Lake Oswego. And we've also, you know, had a lot of discussions with housing stakeholders, as Eric mentioned, city staff, of course. The Housing Production Strategy Task Force has been really instrumental throughout this process in helping us kind of think through the various strategies, as well as the Planning Commission and City Council. So the first set of strategies we'll talk about are what are recommended for initial inclusion in the housing production strategy by the project team, as well as by the HPS task force. And so, you know, ultimately, City Council will be making the decision as to which strategies will be adopted as part of the housing production strategy. So, you know, community input, what we hear from you all tonight and through the online survey and other channels are really important to inform those decisions by City Council. So we definitely want to hear from you all. All right, so I'm just going to get into it. So the first strategy is updating the development code to remove barriers to housing production. So this strategy would involve a comprehensive review and update of the rules that guide housing development, so that's the Community Development Code, to identify and remove or revise regulations that might constrain housing production. So this strategy would focus on addressing the requirements that, you know, have a tendency to limit flexibility for development, to add to housing costs, or delay project approvals. So those would be kind of the main focus areas. And kind of more specific focus areas could include things like removing barriers to accessory dwelling units or ADUs, middle housing types, which we've discussed a few times this evening, and multifamily housing. It could focus on encouraging smaller housing units that are, you know, more affordable, more attainable, and serve different needs for smaller households. Streamlining requirements for design overlay districts, and facilitating housing development in mixed use areas. So those are, that's kind of a handful of things. We've also identified other potential things to look at as part of a development code update. But that's kind of the high level overview. And this strategy would kind of work towards meeting the general need for increased housing production overall in the city, and increasing housing choices. But it, as I mentioned, it could kind of zero in on certain housing types that are really needed in the community as well. And this strategy is expected to have sort of a moderate impact on housing production. Yeah, I should say it's not going to directly lead to housing production, but it could facilitate housing production by removing regulatory constraints. So that's the quick overview. And then we're going to do another poll to see how folks are feeling about this strategy. So yeah, poll number 2, to what extent do you support implementing this development code update strategy as part of the HPS? So you'll see question number 2 in the poll pop up there. And maybe while folks are answering the poll,
I'm actually still, I need to modify the question here just a moment, so apologies on that. Sorry.
Yes, we do have questions in the chat. So one question is just, are the polls anonymous? Yes, they are anonymous. We can't tell who is answering which questions in which way. So that's that. And there's a question about what is a design overlay district? So the city has various kind of areas or neighborhoods in the city that have a specific set of design regulations that are meant to promote like a certain type of sort of character and design aesthetic. And we've heard from various developers and stakeholders that those the standards in those overlay districts are they're pretty detailed, and they can be pretty challenging to meet, and they tend to increase costs of development and make the approval process kind of take a little longer than it might without those very specific standards. So part of that development code update strategy might be to sort of streamline those regulations and processes. All right, and it looks like Eric's got just poll 2 up, so that's great. Okay, there's another question in the chat. Does this include looking at detached units? Many cities in Oregon already include these in their city codes and middle housing. I mean, I think there are various things in a development code update that could facilitate detached units. I don't think it would exclude detached units. I don't know if that answers your question, Cynthia, or if you want to clarify your question. Okay. All right. So we've got 13 responses. I think maybe we'll, there we go. Okay. So it looks like 6 out of the 13 strongly support, 4 support, 1 person opposes, and 2 strongly oppose. All right. Thank you for that. All right, so I guess I'll keep moving. The next strategy is it's a property tax exemption strategy for affordable housing, or for housing that's affordable to low income households. So this strategy would exempt property taxes from housing developments that are affordable to households that earn less than either 60% or 80% of the median family income. And again, that's for Clackamas County median family income for the area. And the way this works is by reducing operating income for the development. Property tax exemptions can be a really powerful tool to increase the feasibility and viability of producing affordable, low-income housing, and even perhaps increase the number of these affordable lower cost units that are feasible within a development. So really increases sort of the effectiveness of affordable housing production. And so this strategy would be targeted to government subsidized affordable housing for low income households. And this strategy is expected to have a really high, potentially high impact on housing production, making these low income affordable housing developments much more feasible to develop. The question is, in the chat, would exemptions last for a certain number of years, or would they last indefinitely? It's a good question. I mean, we're kind of summarizing these strategies very generally. There are different tax exemption programs that are available in the state. Some limit the tax exemption to a set time frame, like 20 years. Other programs actually are indefinite as long as you continue to provide the affordable units. So the city could pursue either one or both of those approaches to tax exemptions. Let's see, another question. Are these for developers or for the families? So the tax exemptions apply to the development. So the housing developer benefits from the tax exemption to make the housing development more feasible. But I would say that, I mean, the families that are, the resulting increase in housing production of affordable units ultimately will benefit the families. And the units are always made available at a price that's affordable to based on the income level. So if you're a family that qualifies because your income is less than either 60 or 80% of the area or family median income, then your rent would be kept at a price that would be affordable based on your income level. Hopefully that answers the question. All right. Should get into the poll for this one. So this is poll number 3. Eric, if you want to get into that. There we go. We'll just give you a minute to respond here. All right, so it looks like 4 strongly support, 5 support, 3 oppose, and 1 strongly opposes. Okay. Moving on to the next strategy. So this one is public-private partnerships for affordable housing. So these are arrangements between public or city government or other government agencies and private entities, which could be a nonprofit or a for-profit housing developer, to build housing. And especially this would focus on affordable housing for low-income folks or for people with specific housing needs. And public-private partnerships, the benefit is that they bring resources to the table that would otherwise not be available if each organization were trying to, develop housing or encourage housing independently. And the city could partner with organizations to support their affordable housing efforts in a wide variety of ways. And this is something the city is already doing to some extent. But the city could consider kind of taking this further by acquiring land or donating city-owned land, providing grants or loans for development or for rehabilitation projects for existing housing units. They could provide direct funding to an affordable housing provider, and they can help leverage federal, state, or regional funding sources. And this, again, is targeted at government subsidized affordable housing for low-income households. And similarly, this is expected to have a pretty large magnitude of impact on housing production. And that really, partnerships are often a pretty critical component of delivering affordable housing production in a community. So let's see, maybe we'll do the poll, and at the same time we can answer questions in the chat. Let's see, related to public-private partnerships, question is, does this include a land trust as an option? I think, yeah, that could be an option. So a community land trust is a type of sort of a nonprofit organization that owns land and builds housing that is typically for sale. The housing units are for sale, but they're sold at an affordable price to income qualifying lower income households or moderate income households. And that housing remains affordable even if that family were to sell it to another family. So it kind of remains affordable in perpetuity. And that's something that the city could consider supporting. It's sort of similar to Habitat for Humanity's model for housing development, and the city is already working with Habitat to build housing right now, or Habitat is working to build housing in Lake Oswego right now, and the city is supporting that. So your question is, do the partnerships lead to rentals or owner-occupied housing? Could be either. As I just mentioned, the community land trust model or the Habitat for Humanity model, those are both focused on ownership housing, but often affordable housing development is for rental focus, but it really can go both ways. And Rosalie asked, like Proud Ground. Yes, exactly. Proud Ground is an example of a community land trust that is working in, not specifically in Lake Oswego yet, but in other communities in the sort of Portland metro area and other places in Oregon as well. Let's see. Any discussion as to how much money Lake Oswego is thinking about to support this strategy? Haven't taken it that far yet. I think this is kind of a general, it's kind of a bit of a catch-all strategy for a variety of approaches to supporting other organizations in housing development. But we will talk about other potential funding sources as part of other strategies that we'll discuss this evening. Okay. Let's see, it looks like we've got 11 responses to the public-private partnership strategy. So do we want to end that poll? All right, so 6 strongly support, 2 neutral, 1 opposed, 2 strongly opposed. All right, thank you. Okay, keep it going. So the next strategy is kind of a policy sort of programmatic strategy. So this would, so fair housing policy and education. This would amend the Lake Oswego Comprehensive Plan, which is the document that guides the long-term development and growth of the city, to explicitly make affirmatively furthering fair housing an official housing, or excuse me, official city policy. So federal fair housing laws protect individuals in what are referred to as protected classes from housing discrimination. And in Oregon, protected classes include race, color, national origin, religion, disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, and marital status. So those laws prohibit any kind of housing discrimination on the basis of those characteristics. So adding affirmatively furthering fair housing as a city policy would really demonstrate Lake Oswego's commitment to addressing and reversing discrimination, exclusion, and concentrations of wealth and segregation in the city. And the strategy also involves other actions to educate staff and decision makers and other community members about fair housing issues and providing education and information to residents and property owners and other folks involved in sort of housing and real estate. So this strategy would not directly address housing needs. It's not really working towards housing production necessarily, but it would, work towards preventing housing discrimination against protected classes, and again, kind of focusing the city's housing activities in a way that sort of reverses discrimination, as I mentioned. So because it's not really addressing housing needs specifically, this is kind of a low magnitude of impact, but still I think worthy of consideration as part of the housing prediction strategy. Let's see. There's a comment here. Oh, maybe we'll move on to the poll for this one. Poll number 5. And there is a comment to say, please add strongly approved to the last poll. So we can make a note of that to kind of add that to our tally for poll number 4. And there's a question, I think, related to the last strategy. If Lake Oswego invests, does the city get a return, or do all rents, et cetera, go to the developer? I mean, in this case, I think contributing to affordable housing production doesn't necessarily lead to a financial return to the city, but it's, it's a public benefit that the city is kind of contributing to, and it's a benefit to the community. So I think that's maybe a different way of looking at it. I don't know, Eric, if you have anything to add to that response.
No, nothing to add. I think that is a good response, Kate.
Okay.
Yeah, still trying to sort of add the rest of the questions back to the poll, so apologies.
Okay. You're busy.
Glued in here. Looks like we have about 12 responses here, so that might roughly correspond with the number of responses we are probably getting at this point. So I can go ahead and end the poll. I guess last call for anybody who has an answer to go ahead and answer, and I'll go ahead and end.
All right. So fair housing and education. Oh yeah, sorry. 6 strongly support, 3 support, and then 1 each for neutral, oppose, and strongly oppose. There's a question or maybe a comment on fair housing. It's very important, but the city should also have a renter's bill of rights of some sort. And then another question is, why doesn't the city already have a fair housing policy? I don't know, Eric, if you want to respond to that.
That's a good question. I am not sure exactly why we don't already have one. I think, we certainly have been compliant with fair housing policies and practices, and, work to, make sure that we're in sort of the right when it comes to that stuff. But we haven't adopted a formal policy. So I think that's something that would, this is a great opportunity to do that as a part of the housing production strategy. I think it's probably just we haven't formally updated the comprehensive plan and our, planning documents since we've been doing this planning work. So that's something we're hoping to achieve here.
All right, let's keep it moving to the next strategy, which is rezoning selected areas to support residential development. This strategy involves rezoning commercial or other types of non-residential land to allow for housing development in those areas, and especially focused on multifamily housing. And it could also involve rezoning lower density areas to allow for higher density housing, such as multifamily. And areas that would be sort of eligible for potential rezoning would typically include land that's close to existing high density areas or existing services like transit, proximity to commercial areas, schools, parks, other things like that. And also larger parcels of land that have more sort of development potential. And the strategy really is intended to address the fact that the city faces a shortage of residential land, as Eric mentioned earlier, and that's across all zone types, so low density all the way to high density to meet long-term housing needs. So this strategy would, work towards the general need for increased housing production in the city, but it could also focus on addressing the shortage of higher density land for multifamily housing. And this strategy could have a moderate to higher impact on housing production, especially given the limited supply and high demand for buildable land in the city. So moving on to poll number 6. All right, I think 12 is about what we've been getting. So looks like 5 strongly support, 4 support, 1 opposes, and 2 strongly oppose. And it looks like, Eric, we might be running just a little bit behind our schedule, so I'm going to try to keep things moving. The next strategy, and this gets at some of the comments that we heard earlier this evening, evaluating accessible design incentives or mandates. So this strategy would aim to increase development of housing that is accessible for seniors and people with disabilities or other mobility challenges through either incentives or requirements to develop those types of housing units. So potential incentive, which would, are optional, they would encourage that type of housing, could include things like height or density bonuses and reduced property taxes. Potential mandates or requirements could include requiring that a certain number of units in a multi-unit development, for example, need to have enhanced accessibility. And there are already some sort of baseline requirements as part of the ADA, and there are requirements for projects that are publicly funded to have a certain number of accessible units, but this would kind of go beyond those sort of minimum requirements. So the city would really need to kind of consider and further evaluate the feasibility and potential trade-offs associated with these programs before implementing any particular action. So that's why this one is framed as kind of evaluating instead of moving forward with a particular action. And this strategy could have a moderate impact, and really the impact would sort of depend on whether it's at the requirement or just an incentive and how those are structured. So I guess we'll move forward onto the poll for this one, poll number 7. And it looks like we did get a comment on the last poll, number 6. So we have another vote in the oppose response. And again, just to remind folks that the the online survey is available. So if you're interested in, if you didn't get a chance to respond to all the polls this evening, you can always fill out the survey as well. Let's see. Question related to accessible housing. Could this include detached duplexes and triplexes, which are more accessible? Yeah, I think one of the considerations is whether there could be either requirements or incentives for accessibility in things like duplexes and triplexes, because currently those types of housing are not required to, meet any kind of ADA or accessibility standards. So that could be something that the city looks at, is having some kind of visitability or, other type of universal design, again, sort of incentives or requirements for those types. And let's see. For this one, it looks like we got 12 responses. I want to give everyone a chance to weigh in, but I also know we need to kind of keep moving. Let's see. There's a question about the rezoning strategy. Would that only be developed areas and leaving wilder areas still for outdoor enjoyment? I would say yes. I mean, this would really look at areas that are already, inside city limits and are already kind of identified as eligible for, urban development. So I don't think this would mean turning, this obviously wouldn't mean turning farmland into development, housing development. So this is really looking at either, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I was just going to say, we'd be looking at areas that are already zoned for residential use to some capacity or to some extent, basically. So wouldn't be looking to introduce housing in areas generally where it's not currently allowed. There might be some minor exceptions in commercial districts, but essentially we wouldn't introduce that in areas where it's not currently located. When you're talking about Mountain Park, that's a little bit different. It kind of has its own approval that sort of governs the entire development in various different ways. So it's a little bit more complex, and generally speaking, it's what we call a planned development, and the pathways and sort of green spaces there would not be impacted by this proposal or the rezoning proposal.
All right, I think we've gotten all the responses for the poll number 7 about accessible housing. So looks like there's a lot of support for that one. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'll just share the results.
Okay. Moving on to the next strategy, using tax increment financing to support affordable housing development. So tax increment financing, or TIF, is a way for the city to pay for projects or improvements within a certain area, which can be referred to as an urban renewal area or TIF district, for things like building roads, parks, housing, or other types of improvements. So these projects tend to make land in the area more valuable. And so the city uses the extra revenue that it gets from higher property taxes in those areas to reinvest those funds into development or redevelopment in that area that kind of benefits that area specifically. So TIF can be used as a direct source of funding for projects that meet goals such as affordable housing or mixed use development, development that might not otherwise be feasible in that area. And I should point out that the city has been considering expanding the use of urban renewal, which it already does in kind of the town center area in the city, particularly in the Foothills neighborhood. And as part of that effort, it could make affordable housing a priority for use of funds and development in that area. And because this kind of creates potential funding source for affordable housing, this has the potential for pretty high impact on housing production. All right, so getting into poll number 8.
It should now be launched. So looking for opinions specific to this tax increment financing or TIF strategy. All right, well, we've got 12. I don't want to spend too much time. We haven't been getting 13 so much lately, so I'll go ahead and end the poll. you know, I guess this is an informal last call. But... All right, so you can see we had, you know, basically a little bit more of an even split on this one, but mostly support still. About 33% strongly support, 25% support, 1 neutral vote, and 2 each oppose and strongly oppose. It looks like we have a comment in the chat from Bill. He says, historically, I've seen TIF create less affordable housing, especially in Portland. How would this differ? Well, I guess, you know, that's a very good observation first. You know, I don't want to move through that. I think that's something that we should consider, and something that we could. I think the idea for this strategy is to make those funds usable more to meet our housing needs as a city. So, you know, it's particularly affordable housing, or it's sort of the idea of how we could be spending this TIF money, or at least that's something that we could be doing with the money. But there's, you know, that's just one thing that sort of funding could be used for. But essentially the answer is, you know, we can write the policy and sort of make sure that, you know, we're meeting the needs that we need to be meeting, and keep that in mind. But I appreciate that comment. I'm going to stop sharing the results for this question.
All right. Moving on to the next strategy, which is preparing an affordable housing preservation inventory. So this would be an inventory of existing subsidized and other low cost or affordable housing in the community. And this would support proactive policies intended to preserve existing affordable housing. So the inventory would really just be kind of a first step used to target potential properties for implementation of a larger affordable housing preservation strategy. So this strategy isn't necessarily that preservation strategy, which would really depend on, you know, additional funding. But this is just kind of the first step of the inventory. And just because it's kind of just a step and isn't actually preserving or creating any housing, it would have a relatively low impact. But I do think it's an important action for the city to kind of take in that direction. Okay, so poll number 9, do you support the city implementing an affordable housing preservation inventory? Let's see, there's a question. Could this potentially help keep low-income residents in their homes? Yeah, so I think that's a great question. That's sort of the intent, is to identify where those properties are in the city, because that's something that the city hasn't taken a sort of a comprehensive look at yet. And then once those are identified, there are various strategies the city could look at to help ensure that folks can stay in their homes, either making their homes permanently affordable or providing, you know, grants or loans. Those are often provided through the county or other organizations for, you know, maintaining their home or providing other type of assistance that would help promote that sort of housing stability. All right, looks like we got 10 responses. I'm not seeing any more coming in.
Yeah, I guess this is another reminder for folks to get their answers in. We're going to go ahead and close the poll here in just a moment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here and share the results. Looks like we had 1 neutral party, 3 folks in support, and 6 strongly in support.
Awesome. Okay. The next strategy is modifying system development charges, or SDC fees, so they're scaled by unit size. So SDCs are one-time charges on new development that help pay for the costs of expanding public infrastructure like water and sewer and roads to serve that new development. So the city currently charges SDCs for water, sewer, parks, and transportation improvements. And this strategy involves updating the way the city calculates SDCs or structures the fees so they're tied more directly to the size of a home. And this would also better tie the fees to the development's impact on the system, since smaller housing units tend to have fewer occupants. And so they typically have less impact on the water, sewer, and transportation facilities or systems. So this strategy would work towards promoting more, smaller attainable housing units that might be more affordable to moderate income households or smaller households. And this strategy could have sort of a moderate to lower impact on housing production. It may enable some projects to produce more smaller units and create more, expand housing choices, but it's not expected to have a really huge impact on housing production necessarily. So I'll get into the poll and then maybe get into the questions as well. So let's see. What does the city use the SDCs for once they're collected? So SDCs are used to usually to expand the system or make sort of what are called capital improvements to the system. So building new water lines, building new roads, building new sidewalks, bike lanes, things like that. Those are all paid for by SDCs. Question is, would this include apartments? So I think so. I might defer to Eric if he has specifics about how the city calculates SDCs for apartments versus other housing types.
No, this would definitely, the idea would be that we could apply this to apartments as well. I think the idea is just, basically we'd scale the SDCs based on the size of the unit. So, we can do that for different types of housing.
So another question is, does this mean SDCs could go down per unit? So the idea is they would be lower for smaller units, but the city would need to kind of balance that out to make sure they're not losing revenues that are necessary to kind of pay for those improvements. So for larger homes, larger units, SDCs might actually increase somewhat, but the expectation is that those larger, more expensive units could, they can foot the bill, so to speak. They can afford to pay somewhat higher SDCs.
All right, well, we have 11 responses, it looks like. I'll just go ahead and give folks a heads up that we're going to go ahead and end this poll. So if you have any more, if there's anybody else that wants to share their response, please do so, or forever hold your peace, or just take a look at our strategy online or our survey online and respond to that. So yeah, here are the results. It looks like we have 4 folks strongly in support, 5 supporting, and 1 each opposed and strongly opposed.
All right. So next strategy is creating pre-approved plan sets for accessory dwelling units. So pre-approved plan sets are building plans that have been reviewed in advance for conformance with the city's zoning and building codes. And so the city could consider making these types of plans available for ADUs, which are small homes that are built on the same property as a single family home. And ADUs offer opportunities for family members to live on the same site, but in a separate dwelling unit, or they can also be rented out, which would allow the homeowners to supplement their income and also, provide additional housing options in a neighborhood. So pre-approved plan sets can make ADUs easier to build for the homeowner or developer and reduce costs through reduced design fees and faster permit timelines. Just kind of really expedites the process. And also just to point out, the plan sets could be designed to be accessible, and that would be kind of work towards or support one of the strategies we discussed earlier. So this strategy is really working towards increasing housing choices within existing neighborhoods, potentially increasing rental opportunities, options for multi-generational living, and also opportunities for aging in place. So moving into poll question 11. Do you support pre-approved plan sets for ADUs?
All right, it looks like we have a comment in the chat. I'll just address this one. I think, this is from Cynthia Johnson. She said, I think this should include pre-approved universal design plans. And I think that's a great suggestion. That's something that, we can certainly look at incorporating into the strategy, or even sort of as a piece of the other sort of accessible strategy, accessibility strategy. I know that's sort of about, you know, requirements or incentives, but this could be one potential incentive that we could look at. And this question is, could city fees also be reduced due to efficiencies? So I'm not sure. Yeah, I think you're referring to ADUs and the fees. You know, that's a good suggestion. I appreciate that suggestion. I suppose, you know, so we do already do a lot of reduction of fees for accessory dwelling units at the city currently. So essentially, we do allow them to be exempted from systems development charges if they sort of agree not to rent out their unit, more or less. So there are a number of incentives that are available for these units that would not be available if they were going to be rental units, you know, for short-term rentals. So that's one way. We already do, you know, sort of heavily reduce these fees. There are some, you know, ways that we might be able to take that further, but yeah, that we do exempt the SDCs already. All right, so I'm going to, well, let's just go ahead and talk through Rosalie, her comment. And if they are rented out, they could have the incentive of keeping the rent affordable at least for a number of years. That's what Rosalie's comment was. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So quick summary, it looks like we had 7 folks strongly in support of this idea, 2 support, and 3 strongly oppose.
All right, thank you. Okay, so that was our first batch of strategies. I think it's taking a little bit longer for us to get through just responding to your questions and getting through the polls. So I think we're just going to keep it moving, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end of the forum to have a bigger discussion. So the next set of strategies are things that really need some additional discussion by the Planning Commission and City Council as to whether or not they should be included in the housing production strategy. The first set of strategies are really recommended by the task force and by city staff. In this set of strategies, there's not as clear of a direction on these. So again, community from you all, input from the community will help inform those decisions. Okay, so the first strategy in this group is zoning bonuses for affordable housing. So this involves allowing additional building height, density, floor area, or potentially relaxing other types of zoning strategies to support affordable housing. So these types of bonuses allow affordable developers to make more efficient use of their land, to potentially fit more units into a development and make their projects more financially viable. So the city already has a program to allow limited height or density bonuses for affordable developments in certain zones. But the city could consider either enhancing that program or expanding it to adopt a new bonus, such as reduced open space for affordable housing. That's one potential option. So again, this is working towards meeting the need for, you know, affordable housing for low-income households. It has a potential for sort of a low to moderate income impact. It might lead to a small increase in the number of affordable housing units that are sort of feasible based on these zoning allowances. So poll question number 12, how do you feel about zoning bonuses for affordable housing?
It looks like we've gotten 9 responses in. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, please just put them in the chat and we'll do our best to address them as soon as we can. And I'm not sure if we've had a few folks drop off the call or anything like that, but it looks like we're hitting a bit of a road, a dead end, I guess, here at 9 people. So I'm not sure if we're going to get 11 or 12 this time. So I guess I'll just go ahead and you know, let folks know that we're going to end the poll here in the relatively near future. So there's a comment in the chat from Britt. They said, you know, when we're talking about affordable housing, is this keeping in mind the people who often make too much money for the cutoff, but not enough to make ends meet? I think what you're speaking to is kind of what we would talk about as the different income levels that we would sort of be trying to target for the housing production, different sort of strategies here. So specifically, a lot of times when we're talking about affordable housing, we refer to that as that sort of 80% of AMI, roughly 88,500 for a family of four. So essentially, that's the that's the sort of that's the area median income rather, and then 80% of AMI is about 71,000 for a family of four. So I hope that clarifies that. I think there are ways for the city to target folks sort of in that sort of 80 to 100% of AMI, or 80 to even 120% of AMI, depending on certain programs. So there are ways that we can sort of focus a little bit more on either the lower end or the sort of medium end of the spectrum, I suppose, in some ways. But yeah, I think there's a limit of what we can receive subsidy for, and that's generally at like 120%, usually much deeper. So we did have a comment. I thought this was only 1 hour. This is a tough time slot as we need to get food on the table. I apologize. Yeah, this is a 2-hour meeting. I think hopefully we're going to end quickly enough to have folks have dinner, but I apologize if this has been a difficult time. So I appreciate that comment, and I'll incorporate that for when we do this next time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So a little bit more balanced opinions on the zoning bonus strategy. So we had 3 in support, 3 strongly in support, and 2 neutral, and 2 strongly opposing. I'll stop sharing.
All right, thank you. Excuse me. So the next one is adopting a construction excise tax, or CET, to fund affordable housing projects and programs. Excuse me. So this strategy applies a tax on construction projects, and the funds from that tax would be used to fund affordable housing or other types of needed housing. Could be targeted also to support that moderate income level that we were just discussing. So most cities that have adopted a CET have targeted around 1% for their tax rate on construction projects. And cities do have options to exempt certain types of development, especially housing types that are needed in the community and they wouldn't want to discourage through additional tax. Things like smaller housing units or multifamily housing, or say accessible housing. And I should point out that affordable housing is already exempted from the tax by state law. And so some cities have used CET to fund new affordable housing development, purchase property for affordable housing, which in Lake Oswego has been identified as kind of one of the biggest challenges and needs, is just the land for the development, especially considering the high land costs in the city. Providing financial incentives. And also an example is providing down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. So there's really a wide range of uses for sort of the revenues of the CET. And it is one of the few available locally controlled sources of money to help fund affordable housing. There's state money, there's federal money that is used to support affordable housing development, but this is one of the few things that the city could consider to generate its own revenue to support development in the city. And this really has potential for very high magnitude of impact. We did some calculations, and I think based on a 1% CET, I think the projected revenue was something like $1 to $1.5 million per year, which could really go a long way to support development. Okay, so poll question number 13. Do you support a construction excise tax in the HPS? And if you have any clarifying questions that we can help with, let us know. Looks like we've gotten 10 responses already.
Yeah, I can't remember if we got 10 or 11 the last time around, but yeah, just want to let folks know that we will be ending the poll soon. So if there are any other people that want to get their answers in, now's the time. Also, again, reminder, we have a survey that you can fill out online as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead. Oh, well, I guess it looks like there's a comment or question from Kate Myers. So would the CET be for sure connected to affordable housing or only maybe used for that? So, basically that is what we're proposing here. CETs are, such that they can be used for a variety of different purposes. But that is the strategy essentially that we are talking about here when we talk about the CET. We would be wanting to use it to meet our housing needs, but specifically, to promote affordable housing. Either development or, like Kate was indicating, there are other ways to spend the money that would be, down payment assistance, that type of thing. But, essentially there are a number of different cities that have done that in ways that do sort of focus specifically on using the funding towards affordable housing. And so that's what we're talking about.
And I would also just add that there are some state requirements that some types of CET funds be used to specifically support affordable housing. So if you charge a tax on residential development, those funds do need to go to support affordable development and also affordable home ownership. But a commercial excise tax, construction excise tax is a little bit more flexible. But even those funds, I mean, this is the city's strategy, is to use it for affordable housing.
And that's
and
right.
just,
it wouldn't be a slush fund. Yeah, definitely not. All right, just another comment from Cynthia that I'll share with everybody before I end the poll. Down payment assistance would help keep the workforce in our community. Appreciate that comment. I will go ahead and end things with the poll and share the results with everyone. Got about 5 of you strongly in support, 2 supporting, 2 in opposition, and 1 of you said they strongly oppose.
Okay, I think we have just a few more strategies to get through, and then we can open it up to conversation. So this is another tax-related strategy, and it's adopting a vertical housing development zone tax abatement in targeted areas. And this strategy is intended to encourage multi-story mixed-use development, and that involves, ground floor businesses or other, non-residential uses with housing above that, and also affordable housing in certain areas designated by the city. And this program allows a property tax reduction for 10 years, so it's a limited exemption, and it can really make mixed-use development more financially viable. And this is, notable as a particularly challenging form of development. And projects can earn additional tax reductions if they include housing units that are affordable to low-income households. So you don't necessarily have to include affordable units to qualify for the tax exemption. It just has to meet the sort of mixed-use vertical housing type, but affordability gets you extra tax reductions.
And I would say that's like the base requirements of the program. There's also, local criteria that can be added that could, get at affordability here. But, in essence, this is a tax abatement or tax exemption program that would target mixed use development with that non-residential and residential on the upper floors mix. And, we've talked about other ones that are more for multi-unit properties or nonprofit affordable housing development, specifically affordable housing development. This one is a little bit more flexible, but it is, sort of tied to that mixed use form of development at least. Sorry, Kate, I'll let you keep talking.
That's okay. Yeah, and I think maybe we'll jump into the poll and then respond to the questions. So question is, does this strategy include any provisions to pass the reductions on to renters, buyers, or businesses? That's a really good question. I don't believe it does, really. The intention is to make the project more viable, so it kind of makes the project pencil out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the developer or the property owner is going to pass those savings on to the renters or the occupants of the development. So that's a good question.
If there is that affordability component, there are, if they receive an extra sort of portion of the exemption for having affordable units, they will have affordability requirements on those units. Again, and if we are wanting to write this, tax abatement strategy to focus on affordable housing, that is something that we can try to use through local criteria, I suppose, to an extent. But yeah, I think I think we just got a comment slash question from Betty in the chat. She said this one is designed to get more housing, period, right? Regardless of income, unless there is a focus on affordable housing. And I think that's generally correct. I would just say it's not just housing, period. It's residential on top of commercial housing. So it's not necessarily other forms of housing where you might have a residential ground floor or kind of other forms of non-mixed use development. It would look more like commercial ground floor with a few floors of residential above. Rosalie had a comment here. If you require affordable units, then I change from opposed to support. Noted. And I think this is still a broad strategy. There are other ones that are specifically designed such that they need to be affordable, used for affordable, and that's some of the ones that we talked about in our recommended strategies component. But I think there are obviously some benefits to having those sort of mixed use developments, as folks have pointed out. Britt in the chat just mentioned mixed use makes a walkable area too. So I think we're providing housing units in livable areas with access to amenities and commercial services and things that are oftentimes not adjacent to residential units, at least here in Lake Oswego. Rosalie makes another very good point, and that a walkable area could mean desirability, which could mean higher rents. So this is all true. I agree with both of these comments. Looks like we've got 8 folks that have responded to the chat here. Again, maybe folks have just kind of dropped off this call, but I guess I'll just have a last kind of push for folks to get their answer into this polling question about the vertical housing development zone strategy. All right, it looks like we just have 8 respondents, but I'm going to go ahead and close the poll because I'm really not seeing anything more coming in. So I'll end the poll here. It looks like we had 2 folks strongly in support, 3 in support, and 3 that opposed. And I guess we have one individual that would support affordability in the vertical housing development zone, but not if it weren't designed that way. So that's a bit of a caveat.
All right. Great. One more tax exemption strategy to talk about, which is the multiple unit property tax exemption, or MUPTE, as we like to call it. So this is another 10-year property tax exemption. This is specifically for either multifamily or middle housing, such as triplexes and fourplexes. So this meets the kind of multiple unit category with particular features or particular price points. So MUPTE is a really pretty flexible tax abatement program or strategy that can be used in various ways to encourage development of specific types of needed housing. So the city really has kind of broad discretion and flexibility to structure the program to meet the needs that are most critical and would most benefit from this type of tax exemption. So eligibility criteria could include requirements for affordability, similar to what we've been talking about. Could include accessibility or universal design requirements, unit size. So it could be, you're required to be a 3 or 4 bedroom unit, for example, to provide family size housing, or other types of desirable features. So this is targeted. I mean, again, it's pretty flexible, so it could be kind of targeted at a wide range of housing needs, but more attainable housing choices. Apartments with family-sized units, accessible housing, options for seniors, people with disabilities, et cetera. And this one could have a sort of a moderate impact. I think the city would need to kind of consider sort of potential trade-offs with the various tax abatement strategies that are, kind of under consideration right now. Okay, so MUPTE, multiple unit property tax exemption. What is your level of support for that strategy? Again, keeping in mind, it's pretty flexible, and the city would need to sort of evaluate this one further to determine exactly how the program was structured.
Yeah, it's not in and of itself going to be specifically just for affordable units, but it would be for that sort of more multifamily form of development. All right, so Charles has another question that he had asked before, but wants to ask in relation to this strategy. Do developers have to pass those savings on to renters and buyers? And generally speaking, if there's no affordability kind of requirements that go along with the property tax exemption, that's not something that might happen. It certainly it might happen, but there's no sort of guarantees that there would be a sort of corresponding decrease in rent. Really, we'd just be essentially promoting the development of market rate housing. Another comment from Cynthia: multi-generational housing is important in this community, and I certainly agree with that. Yeah, I think certainly multiple unit developments can facilitate that to an extent. There are other types of middle housing developments that are also very that can really lend themselves to that. So yeah, I appreciate the comment, and we are definitely wanting to consider that as we move forward. All right, looks like we have 9 responses this time around. I'll go ahead and end the poll since that's more than we had last time, and share the results. We have about 3 folks who were strongly in support, 4 that were in support, and then 2 were opposed. You're muted, Kate. Just
Sorry, Eric. Thank you. Sorry, everyone. What I was saying was we have 2 more strategies to get through. So we are almost there. This one is pre-approved plan sets for middle housing types. So this is similar to the strategy we already discussed about pre-approved plans for ADUs. This would, kind of apply a similar strategy to middle housing. So it could encourage things like duplexes, triplexes, or cottage clusters. So those could all be eligible for this program potentially. And similar to the other strategy, these make this type of development, middle housing development, easier to build, reduce costs through lower design fees and faster permitting timelines. And this could also attract developers that typically only build single family housing to maybe get interested in building middle housing instead. So kind of increasing housing choices by encouraging more of that type of development. And also similar to the ADU strategy, I just want to point out that the plan sets could be designed to be accessible and sort of meet multiple goals for the city. So this would work towards, increased housing choices, more attainable housing options, and home ownership options as well. And I think this strategy has a little bit of a more moderate potential impact, just because I think pre-approved plans that would work on a wide range of sites might be a little more challenging for middle housing as compared to accessory dwelling units, which are smaller and could fit kind of in a backyard kind of thing, just because of topography and other issues in Lake Oswego could be a little bit more challenging, but still could work on more sort of standard sized, flatter properties. All right, so poll number 16, pre-approved plans for middle housing.
all right, looks like we've gotten a flood of answers already. Thanks for being so attentive and giving such quick answers for us on this. Looks like we have all 9 of you that are participating that have answered. And I will go ahead and end the poll, though it does look like, yeah, obviously there's a question here from Bill, basically, or more of a comment. Again, it would be good to pass the efficiencies on to the builders or owners, or have some type of guarantee for that. So I think that is one sort of element here that it would be a little bit more difficult for this strategy to ensure that affordability, or sort of make sure that these units are a particular price point. I think this is, yeah, I mean, there's certainly something you can do behind that, but that's that this is a bit more broad of a strategy, I suppose. But I appreciate that comment, Bill. And Michael has a comment here, Michael Hammonds. anything that lowers permit costs would be supported. So this could be accompanied by that, or just the cost of doing the design, et cetera. But yeah, I think it could also be accompanied by an expedited, or obviously it would be expedited permitting, and so there would be some time efficiencies there, but there could also be a cost efficiency that we could include. Looks like we have 9 responses. I'll go ahead and end that poll. And the responses that we got here, we got 6 people strongly in support, 1 in support, 1 neutral, and 1 strongly in opposition. All right, so that's the last of the poll questions for now, but we have a little bit more left before we get to a question and answer session. So I'll go back to Kate.
All right, so this is our last strategy to talk about, and this is kind of called out separately because this is a state mandated strategy or related to state mandates. So these are required pursuant to the state's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities, or CFEC program, which some of you may be aware of. And the city is currently undertaking a citywide parking reform effort to develop regulations that comply with the CFEC rules from the state. And those require the city to reduce or eliminate minimum parking requirements by the end of this year. And while the strategy won't directly result from the city's work to develop strategies to promote housing production, it was included in the recommended list, kind of the starting list of tools and strategies and actions that we kind of considered at the outset of this project that was developed by the state agency. And so, as such, we're recommending that the city recognize the value of this work in facilitating housing development and include it as a strategy in the HPS. So you can learn more about that, the state's program on the DLCD website. And so the specific strategy that would be, potentially included in the housing production strategy is removing or reducing minimum parking requirements. And it's important to point out that parking requirements do restrict flexibility on a site. They take away from the number of units that can be built, and they add to development costs. So this strategy would either eliminate or reduce parking requirements for housing as well as other uses, and would allow the amount of parking provided to be driven by market demand. So this isn't to say that parking, developers would stop providing parking as part of their housing developments. They most likely would to some extent, especially for larger developments, but that they could sort of right size it based on what they see as the market demand. And so the city is already required to remove parking mandates or requirements in certain areas. So near transit, in downtown, and in the Lake Grove Village Center to comply with the new state rules, and also required to take some additional steps to reduce parking requirements in the city. So, for example, the city could consider removing parking mandates citywide as part of that work. But really, this is kind of a separate sort of parallel effort that the city's working on. It's the Citywide Parking Reform Project. So you can take a look at the website to learn more about that project. And, in terms of housing need that the strategy would address, kind of the general need for increased housing production by removing or reducing parking as sort of a barrier to housing production. And this would really be especially beneficial to multifamily development and affordable housing, which tends to be sort of most impacted by high parking requirements. And so this strategy could have a potentially high impact on, promoting the development of that type of housing. So we don't have a poll question for this strategy because it's really kind of part of a separate project, but this would kind of take credit for that work as part of efforts to promote housing production.
Yeah, it is, again, mandated by the state that we do this in some fashion. So that's another component here. Just in terms of questions that we have in the chat, looks like Cynthia said, please remember that many disabled individuals need parking spaces and accessible paths. How are you taking this into account? Well, essentially essentially the reduction of parking requirements, we don't anticipate that will actually necessarily correspond to having fewer parking spaces. It just provides a bit more flexibility for developers. So I think in terms of the applicability of ADA parking requirements, that's not necessarily going to be modified by this proposal. It will be still be kind of based on the amount of parking spaces that are provided in the development. There will still be requirements based on the parking that is provided. I think there are some things that the city could do to encourage that, but there isn't much that we can do to require it. There again, these are state mandates, so they're really, in terms of what the city could do, we couldn't just say, well, we really want you to provide accessible units and not some of these other ones. So, unfortunately, that's not an option that's available to us, but there are ways that we can potentially incentivize that as a part of that project. So again, I'd encourage you to, pay attention to our work on that project. We do have a website and a lot of information that we'll be uploading here related to that work, and we've been doing targeted outreach on that for a few months now. Another question, would this create more biking and transit options? The idea, there are some components of CFEC that would promote that, but the idea is essentially that the parking requirements would be more or less kind of focused in areas that are already designated as town centers within the city, so the more bikeable and walkable areas. And yeah, I guess we're kind of getting into the just general comments sort of phase of the in questions, so maybe we can just kind of move forward to the end of or we can just address these questions rather, I guess, as part of this larger discussion. So I guess I can keep going, but essentially we have a next chat from Michael. The retail commercial under a multi-story residential works well to combine parking with requiring fewer vehicle parking spots. So that's a comment from Michael. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the comment. Bill had a comment. Will this result in parking issues similar to parking availability similar in PDX neighborhoods? That is definitely not what we expect to see here. Lake Oswego is a very different community than Portland. A lot of times, basically we've already been implementing these regulations so far, and there is demand for parking in Lake Oswego. So, we don't necessarily see those issues, occurring here in the city like we might see in other areas that have more of the sort of history of that compact development that, might sort of be further exacerbated by this type of thing. But also the market is such that, parking is generally required in order to sell a unit in the city. I hope that addresses that question. Again, there's more information about the CFEC work on the city website if you're curious about that. But again, this is a state mandate, so there's only so much that the city can do to respond, to this that would be within the realm of the state requirements there as well. The last comment from Charles here. Support for any of these strategies depends on budgets applied to each and the exemptions offered that impact things like density. Also, strategies that provide a benefit to developers that aren't necessarily based or passed on to consumers is problematic. Given the already high tax burden on communities in the metro area, adding to governmentally funded projects without a monetary return to the city is getting more and more difficult to support. I appreciate that comment, and I think that's something that we can certainly consider as we move forward here with the project. I think specifically that idea that these strategies, need to sort of have some more teeth in them, or you support more of the strategies that have that teeth that make sure that the benefits are passed on directly to consumers and not just kind of used to support market rate housing, I think is kind of the gist of what you're saying there. So I appreciate that input there, Charles. And Betty, it looks like you have a question with your hand raised here. Go ahead and unmute.
Sure, thanks. Great presentation. Just a couple of questions and thoughts. When we talk about tax abatements on low-income property, I'm reminded of situations where the abatements lasted for 20 or 30 years, and at the end of that time period, the developer sold the property to someone else, and all of the apartments became market rate apartments. So I loved the fact that you're looking at the inventory of houses in or just apartments in Lake Oswego that might have that sort of tax abatement on them that is not, that is finite. Have I got that? So I just, that's my only thing with tax abatements, you know. People go in there, low income, stay there for years, everybody's happy, and then all of a sudden, the roof is taken off their heads because of that.
I would respond. Yeah, those are great comments, Betty. And my understanding of a lot of affordable housing is funded through various federal funding mechanisms and state funding mechanisms that often have their own kind of affordability requirements for like the number of years that units need to remain affordable and held rent restricted, et cetera. So even if the tax abatement program itself doesn't have that time limit that ensures sort of longer term affordability, oftentimes the kind of funding has those requirements associated with it. So just something to point out. But I think it's a really great point that it's important for the city to be kind of keeping tabs on the units that are coming up for expiration.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the other quick thing, well, go for middle income housing, please, please, please. And as a quick point of information right here from me, remind me again, like for the 14th time, what the AMI or MFI is in this area, Clackamas County.
Yeah,
For a
happy to do
family
that,
of
Betty.
4, you're giving it for a family of 4, and I'll just divide by 4. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it would be, more, yeah, anyway. And so it's typically, we just talk about it in terms of a family of 4, just because that's just the standard that we can use. But yeah, I think that's, I had a few things that I wanted to say, I guess, in response to your first question before I get into this one. But I think just when it comes to the sort of idea that we would want to ensure that these affordability requirements are maintained over longer periods of time, I think, we looked at tax exemptions and abatements that would apply to different types of development, to different parties or different sort of developers. And so, that is a big component of what the nonprofit low-income housing tax exemption could do, is it sort of supports the ongoing sort of maintenance of those units, and sort of, the more we target nonprofit mission-driven entities to utilize those funds, the more that we can have some sense of security that those affordability requirements will be maintained over time. So that is another sort of way that we can steer this that would help with that concern.
I love that. Yeah. And what's the AMI?
And so in the AMI, I'll get back to that question. So it's area median income. It's just the median, so the average, but it's a kind of a different way of looking at average. But won't describe median in too much depth. But basically, it's the median income for Clackamas County as a whole. So that incorporates all the different residents in this county. And for a family of 4, 100% of what we call median family income, or the same as area median income, AMI and MFI, we might be using those interchangeably. Apologies if that's confusing. But so it's $88,500 for a family of 4 at 100% of AMI, and that corresponds to 80% of AMI to about $71,000 for a family of 4.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Good
Yeah,
job.
happy to answer. Thank you so much for participating, Betty.
Yeah.
All right, Bill, looks like you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for presenting all the new strategies. I do have a question about, I would say, the existing strategies or existing code. And that is, this is sort of my opinion or observation in my neighborhood, is the existing code has, and we've all seen this, where we've had smaller, more affordable homes are usually demolished, and they're replaced by much larger homes. And what I've seen is it decreases affordability and may make it, and we've actually had comments with developers here about building middle housing already since HB 2001 came out, where because of the larger homes, they feel that folks would not want to have middle housing because the homes keep getting bigger. The older homes are smaller, they get bigger. And so my question is, will the city look at existing code that is actually creating less affordable housing overall? Is that an option? In particular, is the maximum floor space calculation to the buildable lot size? I think I mentioned this in the last meeting. I live across from a 10,000 square foot build on 2 acres that could have been 16,000 square feet. It's several $1,000,000 and will probably make much of the housing in my area much less affordable. And many of us get calls weekly about selling our property. So that's my comment and question. Thank you.
Appreciate your input there, Bill, and thanks for sharing your experience. I think there are, I think in a few ways, I want to answer your question. So we are looking at a strategy where we look at the existing provisions in the code and identify barriers to affordable housing. And we hadn't necessarily been talking about that in terms of like ways to disincentivize larger homes or expensive homes. We've been talking more about sort of barriers and how we can address those barriers. But it is true that other jurisdictions are kind of taking more of an approach within their zoning, particularly in places like Portland, and some other communities that have, done things within their zoning to actually limit the, single family, floor area that's offered to single family and try to sort of tip the scale a little bit to promote smaller units. And they've seen really, it's a very direct result, it seems like. So that's, just a very kind of a larger kind of comment. We are looking at ways, the barriers that we could sort of eliminate or reduce within the code, but we haven't been thinking about it quite in that way. One thing that does kind of get at that concept, though, is the scaled SDC concept that might kind of, sort of incentivize smaller units and sort of provide them with a benefit in terms of that cost. And that would be scaled again, as Kate was mentioning, that would, really, there'd be a higher SDC charge for the larger developments and that type of strategy. So, that's one thing that we have considered that is somewhat scaled in that way. But I appreciate that observation and insight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. All right, so a few things from Cynthia in the chat. Well, actually, we had one comment from Rosalie that I just want to read out loud. So the renter lives in a place for years and practically pays for the place, but gets booted with nothing to show for it. Agree with Betty. I agree that we want to try to avoid that and do our best to preserve the affordable housing that we do get in the city. Appreciate your comment. Cynthia made a comment, disability and accessibility issues can impact all of our community members at any time, regardless of age and economic bracket. Really time to put this issue front and center, and really appreciate that insight. And, again, we couldn't agree more. And we will, obviously, we're talking about our housing production strategy. We're required by the state to do this thing called a housing production strategy, but there will be, projects that are stemmed from this for, 8 years into the future. So, we look forward to being able to sort of focus in a lot more specific ways on that accessibility issue with housing. So I appreciate that. And I've actually presented to the 50 Plus Advisory Board. We do have folks from the 50 Plus Advisory Board on our task force. So I am trying to sort of start that conversation and have tried to instill the idea into them that maybe they should take this on as a goal for 2024. So, we're looking into that, ways to collaborate with folks there. Another comment from Cynthia. Many cities in Oregon allow detached duplexes and triplexes on single family lots. This concept was well supported by the Middle Housing and Code Advisory Committee. And I appreciate that comment, that is true. So just, to give a little bit of background, we do allow what are called attached units right now, which are, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, but they have to be actually physically attached. That's part of the sort of requirement that we embedded into our middle housing code. But that was, kind of something that was veering away from what the advisory committee had recommended there. And I think folks saw that there were a lot of opportunities for more flexible designs and potentially more opportunities for provision of accessible units with detached plexes. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you keeping that in the conversation here, Cynthia. That is something that we will probably be considering when we talk about code audits and things like that. That different barriers that we have to housing production in the code, that could be something that is at least considered as part of that effort. All right, so Rosalie was saying, or we could put arrows and funny sayings on science in front of those monstrosities that Bill mentioned. Just kidding. the larger mega mansions, I think, is what you're referring to there. Betty had a comment. We really have such large homes which take up so much space. And she said, I think later, I'd love to see laws to disincentivize that. So I appreciate that comment as well. I think that's something that we hadn't really been exploring to the extent that maybe some other jurisdictions are looking at it. So I appreciate that input there. Britt, just saying starter homes would be great for families or even the middle housing. And yeah, I agree, particularly, thinking about just the cycle of families and, folks that are getting their family just started and, trying to move to a place where they think it might be great to go to the schools and raise their kids and appreciate the amenities in this here city. So, just trying to think of ways to promote that, considering that, our household sizes are going a little bit further down. So even middle housing could really be great, 2 to 3 bedroom units for small families or just any size family, really, as long as that works for them. All right, and people are making golf plans for this weekend. I'm not going to address that. And we have some basically some nice words from Cynthia to thank us. So thank you so much for engaging here. We again, we're here to listen and learn, and we have a lot of more content and information out there. If you want to provide further input more than you've already done so, you are welcome to do that through the online open house and survey. I guess I can just close with next steps for the folks that are still here before we adjourn, Kate.
There you go.
All right, so the next step really for our work here is to talk with the City Council and Planning Commission. Planning Commission is essentially going to be invited to the City Council meeting on April 2nd, where we'll talk about these strategies and talk through similar questions to what we talked through today with you all. The next step after that, we'll sort of take all that input into consideration, make any tweaks that were recommended by folks as we go throughout this process, and come up with our draft housing production strategy document, sort of not the initial recommendations, but the actual kind of document itself in June. The task force has been meeting for a while now. They've met 7 times, and they will have their final meeting, 8th meeting, scheduled for June 21st. We'll have an additional Planning Commission work session and City Council study session in the summer, and looking to adopt the HPS in the fall. So stay tuned. And yeah, be sure to spread the word about the survey and distribute that to all the folks you think might be interested in filling that out.
And thank you, Kate, too, for all your work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a great project to work on. And thank you all for your excellent input this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, again, really appreciate folks that are able to join us today. We had so much content to get through, talking at a very high level about so many things. And, I think we were able to get through it in 2 hours. So that's a feat. So thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. And I hope you're able to enjoy the rest of your evening. Any other questions before we take off here? All right, I will take that as a no, and I will go ahead and end the meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening, and yeah, hope to see you around.
Thank you.
Bye.